In April 2023, French President Emmanuel Macron traveled to China on an official state visit. On his flight home, he was interviewed about the Taiwan issue. His response was, "Is it in our interest to accelerate a crisis on Taiwan? No. The worst thing would be to think that we Europeans must become followers on this topic and take our cue from the US agenda and the Chinese overreaction." He concluded Europe should not get caught up in the crises that are not ours. Unsurprisingly, these remarks sparked widespread criticism from many sectors. Politicians and scholars around the world openly condemn him. Yet, some members of the public welcome his stance, arguing that Europe was not America's sidekick. If the US had a problem with China, why should they care? As for national security, nothing in the Taiwan Strait poses an immediate threat to Europe. Russia's war in Ukraine remains the bigger crisis. So is Taiwan truly irrelevant to Europe? Does the conflict in the Taiwan Strait concern only the superpowers of the US and China? In this episode, we will explore whether Taiwan's fate should matter to the Europeans. In the 1990s, the economy of Western Europe was highly developed. Many of the world's top companies were based there, with the UK, France, and West Germany leading the pack. But labor was expensive. Now, if someone came along and said, "Hello, I have a huge supply of extremely cheap labor plus a lot of land," would you be tempted? Of course you would. And that someone was China. Wait a minute. Isn't China a communist country with values that completely oppose those of Western Europe? How could they work together? Well, the popular belief back then was to go ahead and do business with China, help them get rich, then China would naturally become more democratic in the process. So that's how China and Western Europe's partnership took shape. European countries started pouring money into building factories in China, while China produced cheap goods and sold them back to Europe. A perfect win-win. What's more, China's rapid economic growth created a rising middle class, which then became a new market for European products. As of 2023, China is Germany's #1 trading partner, the UK's 5th, and France's 7th. China also ranks among the top 3 importers of products from Italy, Spain, and the Netherlands. Further east, Central and Eastern European countries like East Germany, Poland, and the Czech Republic weren't able to embrace a market economy until after the Soviet Union's collapse. So, as latecomers to the game, they couldn't accumulate as much wealth. As a result, these countries could handle only basic infrastructure projects like road paving, drainage systems, and streetlights. When it came to large-scale projects like building highways, they needed help. Now, if someone showed up and said, "Hello there, I've got a huge pile of money and I want to lend something to you," would you be tempted? Of course you would. And who was this someone? Once again, China. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, China funded major construction projects throughout Central and Eastern Europe, including Croatia's Plastic Bridge, the Hungary-Serbia Railway, and Greece's Port of Piraeus. To strengthen trade and economic ties, China also established the cooperation between China and Central and Eastern European countries, known as the 17+1 Initiative. By 2023, total trade between China and these countries had exceeded 130 billion. And the irony of it all is, after decades of working with China, Europe has slowly realized that instead of China moving toward democracy under European influence, it has been the opposite. Europe's economic and political systems are becoming more and more like China's. Europe faces many headaches when it comes to doing business with China. The first major headache comes from dumping. Everybody knows that China has a problem with overproduction. Now, through building ports and railways all across Europe, China has created a robust transportation network, allowing it to flood the European markets with ease. One of the most significant projects in the Belt and Road Initiative is the China-Europe Railway Express. This railway network traverses multiple Eurasian countries to create a direct transport corridor from China to Europe. The China-Europe Railway Express has operated over 100,000 trips since its launch and transported more than 11 million standard shipping containers. But the reality is, trains coming from China are always packed to the brim, while trains returning to China are pretty much empty. This shows you how massive the trade imbalance is between the two regions. You might be thinking, isn't Europe importing everything from China because of cheap Chinese manufacturing? Affordable consumer goods and components should benefit the European economy, right? That's only half true. If China were selling only products that Europe either can't or doesn't want to produce, then there would be no problem. But China is flooding the market with electric vehicles, solar panels, and steel, the very industries Europe is trying to develop. That is a direct hit to European manufacturing and competitiveness. The second major headache for Europe is overdependence. China is a top trading partner for European countries, often ranking first or second. In 2023, the total trade volume between China and Europe reached a staggering $783 billion. What does this mean? If one side has problems, the other side feels the pain. Take China's current deflation crisis. Shrinking consumer demand in China means fewer buyers for goods from Europe. This is a straight blow to Europe's economy. Germany knows the pain more than anyone else. China is Germany's largest trading partner, and Chinese orders support tens of thousands of German jobs. But in 2023, German exports to China dropped by 9%, forcing major companies to deal with shrinking profits and layoffs. The third major headache is the use of trade as leverage. Because of the economic and interdependence between China and Europe, China often uses trade as a political weapon. If you do something they don't like, they will cut you off. For example, in 2021, Lithuania allowed Taiwan to open a representative office under the name Taiwan. China was furious and immediately suspended imports of Lithuanian goods. It even pressured Germany to stop importing Lithuanian components. In 2023, when Italy considered backing out of the Belt and Road Initiative, China sent officials to have a coffee with Italian businesses. Basically a hint that if Italy pulled out of the Belt and Road, China would put out of economic partnerships. These headaches continue to plague Europe in their dealings with China. But while China's unfair trade practices and use of trade to influence politics may be frustrating, treating China as an enemy will only make things worse. As Europe finds itself between a rock and a hard place, two major events happened that further threaten Europe's security. First, the Russia-Ukraine war. Not only has the war thrown Europe's economy into a state of chaos, it also directly threatens national security. China is a close ally of Russia's. That's why instead of stepping in to stop the war, China has been quietly supporting Russia. What does quietly mean? Well, rather than supplying weapons and ammunition outright, China exports materials that appear to be for civilian use, but can also serve military purposes. For example, bulldozers, used for construction in peacetime. These are good for digging trenches in a war. Mechanical parts, used to assemble machines, but can also be used to build weapons. Multiple media reports have revealed that China's export to Russia surged during the war, with most of the growth coming from dual-use goods that can serve both civilian and military purposes. Of course, this kind of indirect military support crosses a red line for Europe. Every time European and Chinese leaders meet, Europe calls out China and demands that it stop helping Russia, and every time China simply ignores them. Second, the Taiwan Strait conflict. Back in more peaceful times, Europe's approach to Taiwan was to avoid mentioning Taiwan whenever possible. After all, just saying the word Taiwan could piss off China. Plus, trade between Taiwan and Europe wasn't significant, so from Europe's point of view, Taiwan could be written off as a minor inconvenience. But after COVID-19, Europe had a wake-up call. The fact is, Taiwan holds two critical lifelines for the European economy: semiconductors and the Taiwan Strait. Taiwan produces 43% of the world's mature processed chips and 92% of advanced processed chips. Without Taiwan's semiconductors, Europe's electronic industry, automotive sector, and even AI research could come to a halt. In addition, 40% of the EU's external trade passes through the Taiwan Strait. If war were to break out there, both chip supplies and trade routes could be severely disrupted. Because of these two issues, Europe now sees China as more than just a business competitor. It is a threat to their economy and national security. Strategically, Europe relies on the strength of NATO to counter Russia, and the US is top dog in NATO. But under both the Trump and Biden administrations, the US has repeatedly emphasized that the Pacific is America's top priority. So if a military conflict were to break out in the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea, the worst-case scenario could see the US redirecting resources to the Pacific, which would weaken NATO and potentially leave Europe to face Russia alone. In this scenario, who is under the most pressure? Yep, the frontline countries in Central and Eastern Europe. This also explains why these countries are more outspoken in their support of Taiwan compared to Western European countries. From their perspective, Russia is the greatest threat. And since China and Russia are birds of a feather, any conflict involving either of them poses a direct danger to Central and Eastern European nations. Economically, East Asia is currently the fastest growing region in the world, with aggregate economic strength that rivals the US and Europe. However, unlike Europe, which at least has the EU and NATO to unify its collective power, East Asia has no such alliance apart from the relatively loose ASEAN. If China were to take control of Taiwan and the South China Sea, it could gain a massive geopolitical advantage. In response, many East Asian countries will likely align with China, further expanding its influence over the global economy, while simultaneously weakening the power of the US and Europe. This might sound like a dystopian novel, but China is already taking steps in this direction. Many experts have warned that China is working to divide and conquer Europe by selectively opening its markets to certain countries while promoting the Belt and Road Initiative. These strategies are aimed at undermining European unity. That's why every time there's a vote on whether Europe should do something against China, a handful of countries always break rank. We can see from all this that Taiwan is far from insignificant to Europe. Maintaining peace in the Taiwan Strait not only prevents the global economic disruption caused by war, but also helps East Asian countries counterbalance China's influence. This in turn allows Europe to continue maintaining a diplomatic and economic equilibrium with China. Don't forget that while Europe relies on China economically, the dependence goes both ways. Europe is one of China's most important trading partners. If China were to act recklessly, Europe has the ability to impose serious economic consequences on China. Alright, since Taiwan is important to Europe, what can Europe do to help maintain security in the Taiwan Strait? Given the vast distance, sending troops is not an option. However, there's one thing that Europe excels at and that Taiwan desperately needs: diplomatic support. China uses three main tactics to pressure Taiwan diplomatically: luring Taiwan's diplomatic allies away, repeatedly claiming that Taiwan is part of China, and blocking Taiwan from joining international organizations. China's legal warfare and gray zone tactics are among Taiwan's biggest challenges, but diplomacy is Europe's strong suit. So Taiwan urgently needs Europe to speak up on its behalf, defend its sovereignty, and support its participation in more international organizations to strengthen its global standing. At the same time, Europe and Taiwan should maintain regular exchanges and visits to deepen mutual trust and strengthen their relationship. This issue is especially important as the U.S. enters Trump 2.0. Trump's skepticism toward alliances and trade protectionism are challenges for both Taiwan and Europe. As the saying goes, you can never have too many friends. In recent years, Taiwan-Europe relations has been warming, and EU officials have repeatedly stated that Taiwan is an important partner of the EU. Strengthening cooperation between Taiwan and Europe will help both sides navigate Trump's trade protectionism. Taiwan possesses world-leading semiconductor technology, while Europe excels in industries such as chemicals and aerospace. Collaborating on technology and trade can create new supply chains, reducing the risks both sides face amid U.S.-China competition. This cooperation also benefits Taiwan's defense. Taiwan urgently needs to gain an asymmetric warfare advantages over China, and low Earth orbit satellites and unmanned systems are key to this strategy, both of which are European strengths. By working together, Europe can help Taiwan develop its own production capabilities and strengthen Taiwan's defenses. In conclusion, Taiwan is not just an optional presence for Europe, it is a partner who can move forward together with Europe. Taiwan and Europe each have their own areas of expertise and play crucial roles in the global economy. More importantly, Taiwan and Europe both cherish the values of democracy and freedom. These shared values means we have the same approach to global stability and are dedicated to maintaining the rule-based international order. If you find this video helpful, please leave a comment and let us know your thoughts. If you are in a hurry, you can also just give us a like. 2027 is coming. Let's be vigilant together. I'm Chi Fei Fan. See you next time. This video is in collaboration with TaiwanPlus.